Hi guys, this is Tech Howdy. I welcome you to another video tutorial on creating an ASP.NET Core application with Angular 7. In the last video tutorial, we tested the auth card service on our products route. And once we were able to log in, we were not able to see the list of products. And the reason was when we were making a request to the server to a protected API, we were not able to attach the JWT token. Therefore, when the server did not receive any JWT authentication token, it could not validate if the request made by the client was a genuine or a valid request. So therefore, it returned a 401 unauthorized response stating that the person or the client who's trying to view the list of products is not authorized to do so. Therefore, to fix this error, we will go back to our application. Inside the app folder of my client app, I'm going to add a new folder. I'm going to call this folder as helpers. So I'm going to rename this as helpers. Now I have called this helpers, but you don't have to call it helpers. You can rename it to anything that you like. The reason for me to name this as helpers is because this helpers folder will contain all the required classes that will help my application to communicate with the server. Similarly, we had created a helpers folder in the ASP.NET Core application as well, where we had to communicate with the server and we needed the app settings. So it's the same concept. I'm creating another folder here called as helpers, which will help me to communicate with my uh, server. It's a good way if you have a folder called as helpers here, which is going to be accessed by your application. So you try to make it the naming kind of different. So without having to change the name, all I'm going to do is I'm just going to add an underscore over here so I can differentiate between the helpers folder in account controller and the helpers folder inside my client app. So now the next thing that I want to do is go ahead and add a new file. Now I would have to select a TypeScript file. Okay, I need to delete this. I couldn't rename, so I'm going to just remove this. Sorry for that. So I'm going to add a TypeScript file. I'm going to call this as JWT Interceptor.ts. Now I have called this JWT.interceptor.ts because I'm going to use this class to intercept my HTTP requests and attach my JWT token for that request. And I'm using JWT authentication method in this project. If you're using something else, make sure you name that as per your authentication method type. So it's good for other developers to identify what does the class exactly do by its name itself. So I'm calling it JWT because I'm using JWT authentication here. So there is no hard and fast rule that you also have to name it JWT. You can name it something else and still use it for JWT authentication. So I'm going to use this for JWT interceptor.ts to attach my JWT tokens to HTTP requests. So click new. And the next thing that I want to do is I need to inject this particular class inside the root of my application so that it can be accessed by other components. So how do I do that? To inject, as we all know, we have done it in previous services classes. So if you open any service class, how do we inject a service inside the root using the injectable decorator? So all we're going to do is just copy this, put it here, and add the import statement for injectable. So now save this. Now it's injected into the root of my application, but I'm going to get an error because I have not imported it here inside the app module.ts, and I have to also do that. So let's do that. So I'm going to add it over here, import. Sorry, I copied the. So I'm going to import the JWT interceptor from my helpers folder, and it's called jwt.interceptor. Now I'm getting an error over here. And what is this error? It is telling me that has no exported member called as JWT Interceptor. And the reason being that if I go back to my JWT Interceptor class, I need to add an export class over here, name the class. So that's missing, and therefore, if I don't add the export statement here, I cannot export it to the app module.ts. So let's add that. So export class JWT Interceptor, and okay, the spelling is JWT Interceptor, so I just need to copy the same spelling, then go back here, and here, that's it. Now I can save this, go back to my app module.ts, and now I'm not getting any error saying that the class doesn't have any export member. Now the class has an export member, it can be exported. So now that's it. Now let's go ahead and start writing our logic here. So our export class JWT Interceptor. It is very important for this class to intercept HTTP requests. And once it intercepts any HTTP requests in our application, the second thing that it needs to do is attach the JWT Authentication token. Now to intercept HTTP requests, whether it's a GET request, POST request, delete request, or update request, whatever kind of HTTP request, if it wants to intercept it, it needs to first implement the HTTP interceptor class. So let's do that, interceptor. And then we have the import statement. And once again, I want to import it directly from Angular. Let's save this. So now this class implements HTTP interceptor, therefore it will have access to all methods and properties of HTTP interceptor. It's like extending a class in when you create a class, for example, a controller. A controller class will extend the controller, so it will have access to all controller related methods. Similarly, when it's implementing the HTTP interceptor, it will have access to all HTTP interceptor related methods and properties. Now, the next thing that we want to do, guys, is also we need to create a constructor for this class so that we can instantiate some objects. It's the same process that we use in components as well when we instantiate objects. So we need to add a constructor for our class. And inside the constructor, we need to instantiate few objects. And since we are going to intercept the authentication token and add the authentication token, we need to communicate with the account service class, because the account service class is responsible to provide us the token. Let's create an object of account service and then instantiate it in our constructor. So now if you hover over the class name, which is JWT Interceptor, you should see an error which says that it's incorrectly implementing the HTTP interceptor, because the HTTP interceptor requires a base method to be called, and it should be calling the intercept method. Now the intercept method will help us to intercept all the HTTP requests made by this application. So when we call the intercept method, we need to specify few parameters inside the method. So let's do that. So the first parameter is the request type. So request, we'll create an object for that called as request. And this will be of type HTTP request. So we want to know what type of request it is, whether it's a put, whether it's an HTTP post, HTTP get, or HTTP delete, HTTP patch. There are so many types of HTTP requests. So we need to know what type of request so that we can intercept it. So here we'll give the data type as any. And here the missing reference has been added to HTTP request. Second parameter that we need is the next. And this will be the HTTP handler data type. We need these two parameters because our HTTP interceptor class requires us to provide the type of HTTP request that is being made and the HTTP handler to handle that request. If we don't provide this, we cannot use the HTTP interceptor's intercept method. And also we should specify the return type. So we are going to return an observable type of HTTP event. Once again, the type will be any, this is unknown to us. Now the import statement has been added. Now we have to write the logic here for this intercept method. Also get rid of this. I want to import this from RxJS, not from the node modules. So now the first thing that we want to do inside the, when we write the logic for intercepting an HTTP request, we want to add the authorization header with JWT token if it's available. So if the user is logged in, which we will come to know if we request the information from account service, and we have a getter for that called as is logged in, and if the user is logged in, which obviously means the user has a authentication token. So if the user has the authentication token, then we will attach that token to the authorization header. So let's create an object here. Let current user, let's call it current user, equals to, using the account object of account service, we will get the logged in status. So logged in, and assign the value to this current user object. Next thing that we want to do is we want to also get the token from the local storage. That's the web storage of our browser. So we will call this object as token. Let token equal to local storage dot get item, and the key to access the token from local storage is called JWT. And all this information is on the account service. So if we go there, we have set the JWT token with the key called as JWT, and we have a getter called as is logged in, which returns the login status of the user. So now we have saved those two values inside these objects here, and now we will add a condition. Inside this condition, we are going to check if we have a user and the user's token is not equal to undefined, which means that, let's go to the browser and check this. So console, let me log out. Now I've logged out successfully, which means that I have removed my JWT token from the browser's cache. Now let's go ahead and try to get the token. So local storage dot get item JWT, which is the key of the token, and it's null. So which means we have to set a condition to check if the current user, if we have a user which is returning true. So if the user is logged in, which means it's true, and if the token is not equal to undefined. So let's add that. So current user and token is not equal to undefined. So if both these conditions are satisfied, then what we want to do is we want to get the request, the type of request, which is in this object here, and then create a copy of it, basically clone this request. So in the request dot clone method, we can clone this request. And after we have cloned this request, we can add a new variable or attach a new property called as the authorization header to this request. So we cannot modify the original request. Therefore, we want to first create a copy of the original request and modify that copy. If we try to modify the original request, it wouldn't allow us, we'll get an error. So the process here is to first create a copy of the original request and then modify it by adding the token to it. So now I have used the clone method to create a copy, and inside the clone method here we want to set the new headers. So we have to attach the token inside the headers of the request. So hope we have it here. So you see the headers properties. You have to attach the token here inside the headers, because since it was missing, we were getting a 401 unauthorized response. So to add the headers, we will use the set headers property, and the value for that will be authorization since it's going to be a bearer token. I'm going to call it BEARER. You have to type this exactly how you see here. If you do a mistake, you can always copy the code from my DevOps repos, but this is how you are supposed to set the authorization header. So the key will be called as authorization, and then inside the string you will set the token, so bearer, and using the dollar and then open to curly braces, and inside this you will specify the token value which is stored in this variable or this object here. So that's it. Now we have set the bearer token, and the next thing that we want to do is we want to return a response. So return, because you see we have an error here, we cannot leave this method void, we have to return a value. So we are going to return using the next HTTP handler, next object dot handle method, and what are we going to return is this new request that we cloned. So that should be it for this JWT interceptor method. Now the next method, what it does is the next handle, next dot handle basically will pass the control to the next interceptor in the chain. So if there is any other interceptors that you have added, so this interceptor was created just for JWT token, but if you have multiple layers of authentication, then it will pass this request. Now the request is cloned, the new property is added. Now it's going to pass this request to another interceptor. Another interceptor will then clone this request, add the properties that it wants to add, and then again clone it and forward it to the next interceptor in the chain. So that's what this next does. So that should be it for this JWT Interceptor class. In the next video tutorial, we would add this to our app module, and I will show you how we can do that. But this should be it for this video tutorial. The code will be available in the DevOps repos. Please like and subscribe my channel Tech Howdy.